The next morning we had our breakfast at the lodge, then went directly to the upper room of the temple. There was no visible concept of the confines of a room, nor any evidence of limitation, and so we moved freely with no thought of exertion. When we were ready to go below to the room of the records, we were there. As we had accomplished this without the presence of our friends, we realized the reason for their withdrawal and were very much elated over our attainment. The 1st of April was fast approaching. We had finished the records in the temple room and had taken up the work of making measured drawings of the numerous characters and many carvings cut in the rocks outside. This work was going along very nicely because of our all-absorbing interest. One afternoon a messenger came to the village, and as the villagers gathered around him, we saw that something unusual was happening. We dropped our work and proceeded to the village. We met our hostess and were informed that the messenger had brought the information that a party of bandits was at large in the valley below. This caused considerable uneasiness among the inhabitants, as this village had been the focal point of attempted raids for many years. The report had gone far and wide that the Tall Cross Temple was the hiding place for vast treasure. The many attempts to rob the village had failed. The bands had in a great measure attributed former failures to the resistance of the people who lived in the valley below. A number of the bands had now concentrated their combined forces, and a band of about 4,000 well-mounted and armed men were preying upon and devastating the valley in order to discourage the resistance of the inhabitants in closer proximity to the little village of the Tall Cross. They hoped by this method that the raid would be more successful. The messenger also appealed for protection for the remaining inhabitants, as a great many had already been destroyed and they had reached the limit of their resistance. He was told that there was no one in the village who could be sent, but our hostess assured him that he could return to his home and that no harm would come to his people. We went on with our work, noting the uneasiness of the villagers, and that uneasiness was communicated to us. The next morning we again resumed our work, as we were very anxious to complete the references for our records. We were certain they would give a complete and accurate history, and also references as to where other records could be found. Thus we could trace the history of this older and extremely enlightened civilization that occupied this vast and now most remote portion of the world. We were disturbed by the possibility of losing this collection by reason of the bandit raids. As the results of our work, this collection was all assembled in the rooms of the records, where they had hitherto withstood a number of similar raids from the same source. That evening we talked to our hostess about the possibility of the formulation of some plan to aid the villagers, and voiced our surprise and wonder at the absence of our friends. We were told that, as an appeal for aid had been made by the messenger, the bandits would be obliged to stop their raids or they would destroy themselves. We retired that evening, fully assured that we had been over-solicitous of our own safety. We arose early and were preparing to resume work, when the same messenger appeared with the news that the raids had ceased from upon the inhabitants, and that the band had concentrated their entire force about 20 miles down the valley for an apparent concentrated last drive on our little village. As our hostess and little party stood talking to the messenger, who was surrounded by a group of the villagers, a horseman rode into the village and came toward us. In coming toward us, as he passed smaller groups of congregated people, he was apparently recognized. They immediately dispersed and fled in terror. As he neared our group, the messenger called out the horseman's name, and then the messenger, as well as the others, took refuge in flight, evidently fearing that the horseman was being followed by the band. Our hostess and ourselves were the only ones left as we awaited the nearer approach of the horseman. He reined in his horse, and with much gusto addressing our chief, began to speak, saying that the bandits were fully aware we were strangers, and that they were acquainted with our mission. He spoke in a tongue that none of us understood. He saw our bewilderment, and asked if there were not someone that could interpret. Our hostess turned and faced the man as he sat upon his horse, and asked if she could be of service. At first he looked as though he had received a severe electric shock. He, however, sufficiently recovered his composure to fairly spring from his horse. He rushed toward her with outstretched hand, exclaiming, "You here?" in the language that we understand. Then he placed his hands to his forehead and prostrated himself before her, begging her pardon. Our hostess directed him to arise and deliver his message. We could see her form stiffen, and for a moment her features almost blazed with anger. So intense was her display of emotion that for an instant we, as well as the man himself, were absolutely startled out of our composure. The words, "Coward, murderer, step forth and deliver your message," almost leapt from her lips. The man again went to his knees. Again the words blazed forth, "Stand up! Are you so debased that you dare not stand?" We did not wonder at the man's abject terror, for we, as well as he, were absolutely rooted to the spot, unable to move. I am certain had it been humanly possible for the man to have done so, he would have fled from the scene. For the moment he, as well as ourselves, had lost all power of speech and action. He crumpled to the ground, limp and apparently lifeless, his eyes staring and his mouth agape. This was the first and only time in our experience with these people of superior powers that we had seen one of them give expression in any way to violent emotion. We were as terrified as the bandit. The vibrations hit us just as distinctly as the force of a tremendous explosion, accompanied by an electric shock that not only paralyzed speech, but our muscles as well. That is the only way I can describe the sensation. Coming from that slight and unassuming, fragile form, do you wonder that these vibrations paralyzed us into inaction? Although this situation lasted only a moment, it seemed hours before the tension relaxed. We were as transfixed as statues, yet there flooded over us in that instant a great pity for the bandit, and we found ourselves longing to go to his assistance. This was the reaction of all, yet we only stood and stared at our hostess. Almost at once the condition changed. At first a startled look came over her face. Then it changed to the same kindly expression that we were accustomed to, and there swept over us such a wave of compassion that we rushed to the prostrate form on the ground. Our hostess was bending over him, her hand clasping his. Again we were mystified and could only say, "Will wonders never cease?" The man soon regained consciousness, was helped to his feet, and was made as comfortable as possible on a bench nearby. He absolutely refused to enter any of the houses. Our hostess then apologized for the vehemence which she had expressed, noting the effect it had upon us. Our flesh was quivering, and it required some time for us to regain our composure. She explained that this man was the leader of one of the most notorious bands that infested that portion of the Gobi. His name, if mentioned at all, was spoken with awe, as he was the most fearless and ruthless of characters. His familiar title, literally translated, meant "consummate black devil released from hell." His features, portrayed in mask, were kept in many villages and worn by those participating in the ritual of driving the evil spirit from the village and its inhabitants. Our hostess had contacted this man on 2 former occasions when attempted raids had failed, and each time he had evidenced the deepest hatred for her and our friends in general, going out of his way to harass them and sending violent messages from time to time, which they ignored completely. His sudden appearance alone had brought the past indignities so forcibly before her that she, for the time being, had lost control of her emotions. And I want to interject something here. These people, their hostess was one of these masters as well, a woman, a beautiful woman. And she lost control of her emotion. And that is just something a master doesn't do, because when they get angry, as you can see, they all felt it. They all lost the ability to even speak or move. And emotions are so strong. And power can be given to us. I think we're going to walk into that mastery where we ourselves will have this kind of power. But we sure have to rein in our emotions, because as you can see in this case, her brief little time that she got so angry at this man, and really who could blame her, really? I mean, he was a horrible man. And we have some horrible people doing horrible things to people in the world right now, and we get emotionally very angry. And you know, for our master, that's not going to work. If we want to step into mastery, we cannot let our emotion get the best of us, our anger over anything anyone does, even if they have killed a member of our own family or something, like over there where the Palestinians and the Israelis are fighting and killing one another, and they get so angry. Their family members have been killed by those they oppose, and they can't let go of it. Their emotions are just ruling them, and they can't step into their mastery over the situation. And it's a little easier for us because we're not there witnessing all that. And when you can be a little removed from something, it's easier to be less emotional and send love, not just to those that are being what we think on the bad end of the deal, but to them all, to the Palestinians and to the Israelis. They all need us to send our love and forgiveness to them, and not to get so emotional. And not just those people there in the Middle East, but people everywhere, politicians that aren't satisfying us because they seem to not be really representing the people. We can't give way to hate, for hate is the game that the ones working in the dark play so well, and they're better at it than us. And if we play their game, we'll surely lose. But if we don't hate them, if we don't let them get our emotions so aroused that we are capable of such anger, then we'll get the upper hand. And because you see, emotions are very powerful. And in the case of their hostess here, she caught herself. She realized, oh, wait a minute, I gave way to my emotion there, and she saw what it did to everyone, not just the man, not just the bandit. Anyway, I will resume here where I left off in the next video. Just want to put that in there because it has been crossing my mind that I myself have felt anger towards some of the things going on in our world, and especially with the politicians right now. And I don't want to get into that place where I hate them. I don't want to do that. Sometimes it's very hard not to go there, but I'm working on that. And I just want to encourage everybody hearing my voice that you don't give way to hating those that are doing the bad things, or the things that we consider to be so wrong. We don't have to approve of what they're doing, but send them our love, and don't demonize them. They do that to one another all the time, but we don't have to demonize them. We just don't want to do that. Okay. Until next time. Over and out.